Good evening. I'm Rabinder Singh with the Library Administration. Welcome to this Interfaith Dialogue. Our returning panelists are Rabbi Jessica Boehner, Reverend Majid, Hurunisa Faryad, and Zeba Hassan, our moderator. Zeba is a biracial, bicultural American Muslim. Born and raised in Chicago, Zeba's Irish and Pakistani heritage and interfaith upbringing gave her a head start on navigating between identities. She is the founder and co host of the national podcast called Momming While Muslim. While she isn't parenting her four children or podcasting, she is working on a certification in spirituality and conflict resolution. So, welcome everyone. And Seba, if you will introduce our panelists, that would be fabulous.
Thank you so much again for hosting us, Ravinder. We definitely appreciate it because these types of conversations are definitely needed in our community. So thank you to Fairfax County Public Library for doing this today. I just wanted to give a little bit of background. Like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam intersect through the traditions of Abraham, and for the people that don't actually know that. However, the commonality actually goes way back to the roots of the original mother, Eve. So today we're going to be talking about our spiritual stories, humankind's fall from heaven. There's more than one version of the story and what that means to us as women or doesn't, depending on what faith tradition you're coming from. Was womankind actually doomed or cursed from the beginning of time to the end of days? Or are we actually the people that redeem humanity? Let's kind of pursue a little bit more of an informed understanding today about feminine power and the roles in the human condition and why we all practice as we do. I am so excited today to have these beautiful, lovely ladies again joining us today. Hurunisa Faryad is the head of the outreach and interfaith at the All Dulles Area Muslim Society Center. It's literally the largest Islamic center in the United States. She serves on the American Muslim community, and she's the director of outreach for the Multi-Faith Neighborhood Network, where she is responsible for connecting different city clergy and women to MFNN's mission and vision. That's a new position, so I'm super excited for her on that. She's also the founder and co-host of Sister Act, which is a beautiful podcast, one of our favorites, where she has a female rabbi, a female Christian scholar, and they have conversations based around life, faith, and resiliency. We have Rabbi Jessie Weiner, who happens to be one of my sisters from Sisterhood of Islam Shalom. She serves as the associate rabbi at Northern Virginia Hebrew Congregation in Reston, Virginia. She works among community members of all ages, and I think she kind of specializes in the youth from what my stories with her kind of illustrate. And so she teaches Torah as a way of life for people of all ages. And she went to, I think it's the Jewish Institute of Religion in 2016, and then she earned her Master's of Art in Hebrew Letters in 2015. And then we have Reverend Joy Majid, and because I didn't get a chance to get her bio, I'm going to start with her. Reverend Joy, could you tell us a little bit about yourself to our listeners today?
Mine is a simple introduction. I'm pastor of Garfield Memorial Christian Church in McLean, Virginia.
Around the corner.
Around the corner.
Which I love. It's like our neighborhood church, which we love.
I have many backgrounds. This is for me, as they would say in Sister Act, this is my closing act.
Oh, I love that.
To continue to serve this community. We're in the process of beginning to build a new church.
Oh, I love that.
And trust me, you'll all be invited to participate in some of the planning and all the other things that will go along with that. So look forward to that introduction.
I am super excited about that, and count us in for whatever help that you need, because I know you are right around the corner for me, and I'm happy to help and volunteer my children if it comes down to it. But
yay for the children.
It's the next generation, which is why we are all the mothers that we are, right? So We're going to get started today, because I know this is a very interesting and personal subject for me personally, because I just love the story of Eve. It's just something, and Hawa it's the the word for it in Arabic, and I just really enjoy it. So, we are all in essence the daughters of Eve, as our religious traditions all branch from the same exact tree. There are a multitude of stories and or ideologies that surround the mystery of the first man and, of course, the first woman. So I am going to ask each of you guys to share your Eve story from your faith perspective. So we're going to start with Rabbi Jesse, who is from the Jewish faith. Could you share a little bit about the story of Eve and the precursor to Eve? Because I know that that's a little bit of uniqueness in the Jewish faith.
Yeah. So what's really interesting about Judaism and in Torah, what we call Torah, what others may call the Bible or the Old Testament, is that in Genesis, actually, we have two creation stories back to back. There's a lot of debate and discussion about why we have those two creation stories, and that could be a whole other podcast. But we have these two creation stories, and in the first one, we don't meet Eve per se, but what we know is that it says that God created man. God created man to be in His image, male and female. God created them. That's the first story. And there's, of course, so much discussion and dialogue as to, well, was this more of an androgynous person that was both male and female? Was it two people attached together? Were they two separate people? And there's all sorts of conversation. The beauty of Judaism is that over time, these discussions happen and are documented, and pretty much, anybody who's sort of a major scholar, their opinion is recorded somewhere. And so we have all of these different conversations about what do we believe in terms of that first creation story. And really what it comes down to is saying, no, it wasn't one person. It was two people that were created, because it says singular, male and female, and then God created them, plural. In the Hebrew, it says them. So that's how we sort of figure out that it's really those two people. Where we get into Eve is in the second creation story then, which is in the second chapter of Genesis. So already we're a chapter in when we're learning about Eve. And this is, again, in the midst of the second creation story. And there, God is creating all of these beings, and God creates Adam. The word Adam in Hebrew both means is a name, the name Adam, but it also means sort of just a general term for a human being or a person. Also comes from the same root as Adamah, which means earth. I happen to think that's interesting, especially because they're in the Garden of Eden, and of course everything is connected to the earth and the tree. And we have this connection to earth through Adam. But God creates all of these beings and sees that none of them are the right helpmate for Adam. That's the terminology that we use. And so what God does is essentially sort of puts Adam into a stupor or a sleep and removes a rib and creates Eve from the rib of Adam. And what's interesting and what we don't necessarily see until we actually read the Hebrew is that we have Adam, who is an Ish. Ish means man in Hebrew, and Eve, which means Isha, which means woman, right? So they're of the same root, the same word, truly. It's just that Hebrew is a gendered language. And so that's why Ish and Isha, man and woman. But there's a lot of conversation about the fact that the reason that they're referred to as Ish and Isha is because they really are connected, right? That Eve came from the rib of Adam. And so inherently, all of us as human beings are connected in that way. I'll continue with the Eve story in a moment. I do want to go back just for 1 second to a part of the first creation story that is really important in Judaism, which is that it mentions that every being, every person is created in the image of God. And that's something for us that we still believe today, that every single person is created in the image of God. And since, all of us look different, even identical twins have their differences, right? And yet all of us are in the image of God, which is something that's really important for us. And so then we have, of course, Adam and Eve, who are in the Garden of Eden, and Eve is led astray by the serpent or the snake, who convinces her to take from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and to convince Adam also to take from the tree of knowledge and good and evil. And they eat these fruits. Often we talk about them as apples. We don't actually know what fruit they were, but they eat this fruit of the tree. And when they eat of the fruit of the tree, that's when then they sort of gain all knowledge and awareness of the world, right? Before that, they weren't embarrassed by who they were as people and their bodies. And right after is when we get into that they cover up their bodies immediately because they're ashamed or embarrassed and want to hide a little bit from each other. But this awareness, this opening up of the eyes, that's what really puts us forward in terms of human beings having this ability to think and having free will. We often talk about coming from this, that we have free will to make choice, and it may not always be the choice that God agrees with, but each of us as human beings are able to make those choices. And ultimately, of course, in this story, Eve is punished. The snake or the serpent and Eve are punished. The serpent is punished by the removal of the legs, right? So he has to slither like a snake for the whole time, that he doesn't have legs anymore. He can't walk around more like an alligator or something else. And Eve, of course, is punished. I use that term because I don't necessarily see it as a punishment, but by having to bear children and the pain that comes along with bearing children. And so there's a lot of sort of lore around that idea, of course, of a punishment being childbearing, when of course that is also the greatest gift that we have, is to be able to continue on with the next generation, right? If we couldn't give birth to children, who knows what it would be like. It was the writer's way of sort of explaining biology, so to speak, in an ancient way. And so that for us is really the story of Eve. Zeba, do you want me to mention Lilith now, or do you want me to save that for later? Okay.
Because there was in my research, I definitely noticed that there was a Lilith before Eve, and I thought that was really interesting because that was pretty unique to the Jewish faith tradition itself. So if you don't mind talking about that.
Sure. And this is sort of little known. People know the name Lily or Lilith as being associated in some way with the creation story, but it's sort of a little known story. And it actually comes from a writing called the Alphabet of Ben Sira. It was written in the 8th century CE. So Lilith in and of herself is actually not mentioned in the creation story. Lilith is mentioned once in Isaiah, and I can't remember where exactly in Isaiah, but as a dweller in waste places. That she's basically, Lilith is like a demon who sort of is not the nicest of people, and tries to taunt Adam in different sorts of ways. And it's interesting because it's there and it exists. But up until I would say about the 1960s or so, right, what we saw prior to the 1960s was Lilith as a demon, and this idea that women taunt themselves and flaunt themselves in front of men, and we make men make bad decisions, right? That it's the woman's fault that we make men make bad decisions. And there's a Jewish theologian named Judith Plaskow, who is also a feminist, and has a lot of amazing work that she's written. But she wrote Midrash, Midrash is basically story, sort of reading between the lines and imagining what all of the details are that we don't get in the actual text. And she transformed Lilith in the sort of American feminist wave of the 1960s. She transformed Lilith from this demon to a role model of a strong woman, and a woman who should be held up as opposed to brought down. And so that is really who Lilith is in a very, very tiny little nutshell. There's all sorts of text about her. I would encourage you all to read about it. It's very interesting. It's not something that we talk about very frequently in Judaism because it's not actually a part of our text. And yet it is a part of our folklore in that way.
That's so funny. And a little known fact, Lilith Fair was named after a little piece of trivia after this Lilith as a fight song for women. So I think it's funny that you said that women bear the brunt of giving birth, but the reality of the situation is I think if men did it, that we would have ended at Adam and Eve, but I'll leave that there and we will go to Reverend Joy. And I would imagine that you have a similar shared history with the Jewish culture, because I think some of this story came from the Old Testament as well. But can you tell us a little bit from the Christian perspective of the Eve story and how she came to be?
Well, first I want to thank Rabbi Jesse for that wonderful, great synopsis. It was quick, it was clean, and it was clear. So thank you for that. I always love to refer to my Hebrew scholars because they can take the root meaning of a word and break it down as to what it meant at a particular time and space, and that has a lot of tremendous value. I'm going to focus on the second creation story, if you will. And I always found this interesting because someone says, oh, women were accused of, getting us in the mess that we're in. And, they're the sinners, they're the this, that, and the other. But when you read the second creation story over in Genesis 2, I think it may have been the second and third chapters. One of the things I appreciate, and I am a purist when it comes to my faith and my faith journey, and I leave all the scholarly works to the scholars, and I interpret the word of God as it is and as I can live it out and share it with others at a point in which they can embrace the love of God. So for me, when I read the first one, it's cute. The second one, it was interesting because it's very clear in the second creation story that God had actually given Adam his instructions before he put him to sleep and formed the woman from his rib. So the instructions to me, as I interpret it, was the instructions were to Adam. And so when someone has ever come to me with, Eve is the cause of our destruction, the reason why we have labor, the reason that we do this and the other, I say to them, everything is perspective. And simply by perspective, I mean that God gave all of us free will. And the one thing that it did say about Eve is that, which many of us may be guilty of today, and that is lending our ear to foolishness. And we know it's foolishness when we hear it, but we lend our ear to it nevertheless. And some of the consequences as a result, when you read the second creation story, is that because Eve listened, she engaged, she allowed herself to be engaged by the serpent. But the instructions not to eat of that tree was an instruction that God had given to Adam before the rib was pulled from his chest to bring Eve into being. So I think that we cannot allow ourselves, so we have to read and study for ourselves. And we have to take that which is of value and understanding to us and to live that and not let others, however it may come. Because when God gives you an instruction, that instruction is for you. And you have a choice. You can receive it, you can act on it, or you can ignore it because he gave us free will. And so I just say to my sisters out there, before we allow, I don't care whoever the other may be, sometimes it's another sister, we have to take a step back and understand what our relationship is with our God and what he has said to us in our ear, and that we need to be diligent to those instructions.
I love that you said that, Reverend Joy, and I definitely appreciate it. Just because it is about perspective, right? It's about we are our interpretation of something and how we want to live our trueness and our connection to our individual God. So I definitely appreciate that you made that distinction. But now we're going to go to Sister Nessa, as I like to call her. She is going to tell us a little bit about the Eve or Hawa story in the Islamic tradition.
Thank you, Zeba, so much for that. And Rabinder for putting this together, and my fellow panelists on having this really interesting topic, especially for us women. It's always interesting to hear different points of view. Even though a lot of our stories are similar, there are some variations in terms of certain incidents or certain details that are a little bit different when it comes to Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. So when, God told his angels that he was going to create a man and send him off to earth, and that I'm going to do a quick version of this because I don't want to hold up and repeat a lot of the things everybody else has said, and had told the angels to bow to Adam, not out of worship, but just because it was a commandment of God. Right. And the angels under Islamic rule don't have a choice. They don't have free will. They have to do whatever God commands them to do. And Satan, who was not an angel, but was of a creation called jinn, which is like a smokeless fire, thought, wait a minute, you're asking me to bow down to, this thing that's created. And he had the ability to make a choice, and he chose out of his own arrogance not to do that. And so God banished him from that area. And when Adam and Eve were in heaven, and God had told them to walk around and enjoy it, but to stay away from the tree and not to go there, Satan's wish from God was to be able to tempt mankind. And so he started with Adam and Eve, and he told them that, maybe you want to go to this tree because, you could become immortal, and that's why you're forbidden. And so, falling under temptation, both Adam and Eve ate from the tree, right? So there's no indication in any Islamic text in the Quran that Eve tempted Adam, seduced him to eat from the tree, or she was the cause of the fall, or she was in any way responsible. Because an Islamic concept and tradition is that all human beings are created with their own free mind to make choices, like the Reverend had just mentioned. This is a concept in Islam as well. So to put the blame on the women when there is no context of that in the Quran is injustice on women throughout history, because we see her as our mother, right? And when our mother is completely sidelined and being seen as the person who perpetuated this sin, is now going to affect all of us as women. So we have to move away from this definition and this kind of thinking about how Eve was and how she played a role in all of this. So they both sinned, and it was something that was on both of them. Even Satan playing his role, it's something that we as human beings, even today, are something that we're going through, because that's something that is part of not of him competing with God, because God still created Satan. It's part of the process of us coming close to God and making sure that the choices we're making as human beings are the ones that are connected to God. And that as human beings, we do fail, we do sin, we do fall back, but then we're always guided back to that ability to get God to forgive us and to come back to him. So Eve, as being our mother, has always been in tradition to being connected to this idea of the status of women in Islam, right? Since her being the first mother and her having this projected essence in Islam. A lot of scholars would say that, oh, this rib concept, she came from the rib. There's no clear indication of this in the Quran. There's nothing in the Quran that says she was made from the rib. A lot of the scholars interpret that verse as she was made from your kind, or she was made from the human race. And so we look at it as like she was made as another human being to give companionship to Adam, and for them to live in tranquility, to give each other solace during their time in heaven, and then subsequently when they had to leave.
That's actually really interesting. And just to kind of piggyback on that, we are going to talk a little bit about that whole concept of the original sin, because that is something that is a misnomer that a lot of people, I mean, even let's just be real, the only guy that's on here today I see is my dad. So sorry, Dad. I'm just going to say this out loud, but the whole concept of like period pains and these types of things, oh, it's because you sinned or you did something, and this is God's punishment to you. So what is that concept, Nessa, in Islam about the original sin, if there is a concept of the original sin?
There is no concept of original sin in Islam. Again, the issue is, as human beings, we're questioned for our own deeds. Someone else's sin is not going to be something that I'm going to have to answer for, or someone else would have to answer for my sins. My sins are my sins, and that's something that I will be questioned for and I will have to deal with. So to put the burden on Eve or to Adam is not an Islamic concept. They're going to be questioned for whatever they did right or wrong, and I'm going to be questioned for whatever I did right or wrong. And that's just the simplest breakdown I can give you. And it's interesting how you talk about period being this thing of like it makes the woman evil, and it's because you sinned, you got this period thing. In Islam, it's not looked that way at all. A period is part of the process of being a woman, right? There's a whole scientific connection to it, and as to why it happens. And when you're on your menses as a Muslim woman, you are not required to pray the 5 daily prayers, not because you're dirty or you're evil or you're sinful or God hates you during this time. It's because the period itself is not clean. So you have to be in a state of purity to pray. And even for all men, you have to do ablution before you pray. And for women as well, you have to go wash your hands, wash your face, do all these different things, and making sure you're clean before you pray. So when you're in the state of being on your menses, the blood that's coming out, that in itself is what's not pure. So God has given women a mercy during that time to not have to pray. Right. And the great thing is, which I pointed out all the time, people talk about Muslim women being oppressed. I don't have to make up those prayers that I didn't have to pray during my period. I'm like, yes, exactly. Like, imagine having to go up and down, cramping, like, it's just not fun. Like, all the women can relate to me who go through this, but we don't have to make it up. And that's because God is merciful to the situation that he gave us. We didn't have a choice in it. He gave it to us, and he gave us the mercy that comes along with it as well.
I definitely appreciate that, but I can only speak for myself. I actually am evil during that time, and I fully own it, and I'm just going to be okay with that, and everybody knows, and I'm just going to be honest about that. So, Reverend Joy, you talked a little bit about the original sin and actually the misnomer in the Christian faith as to why it should not be viewed as the original sin. Do you have anything else to add with your eloquent explanation that you had before?
Well, just that, I always found it fascinating when I would get that story as a kid. I was like, what? And how could, in all of God's creation, this divine act of love, out of all of that, how could he create a human that would defy or be defiled in such a manner. He created us out of the purity of his heart. So if it's something that's done as our individual choices that were done, but it was not a woman. It was, I could just never, ever, ever accept that in my spirit, that God took all this time to create all the heavens and all the earths and all the fish of the sea and Adam, to blow breath into him, for him to name everything, and then for him to pull a woman from a bone of his breast, and that he would use that against, he would allow that to be used against itself. That's like God turning on itself. And so it just never made sense to me and was acceptable. And I got shut down a whole lot of times in Sunday school. I was not the child you called on. I was not the one you called on, trust me.
I would
So
imagine you were a little bit of a troublemaker, Reverend Joy.
that was about how I was put it. And at that particular, and as I grew up, my father became superintendent of Sunday school and, then deacon and all those other things. And so they would say, leave that little one over there alone. And so the message that the other men in the church sent to me was that the voice of woman was not valued. And that was not unusual in my day and age coming up. I'm in my 70s, and in the Baptist church back in those days, women and little kids were meant to sit, watch, and not ask a lot of questions. It was the sisters of the church who taught us all the things that they didn't want us to know. So, so we were taught at a very early, or you learn at a very early age, that your voice in the church, especially around Eve and other women who were considered of her ilk, like Jezebel, were these terrible women, and you should never want to be like them, even though you may not have known anything about them. But as you grow, you read for yourself, and you're accountable for yourself.
No, I definitely appreciate that, because God gave us all the knowledge, right, to read these words on our own. And I definitely appreciate that. So maybe we can all get a little bit of Lilith in us as we move forward, and fight some of that, that negative energy that comes with female voices, which is one of the main reasons why I really wanted to have an all-female panel specifically, because for me personally, I was kind of done with men speaking on my behalf. And I was like, okay, we're just going to take it over because we have our own voices. So I definitely appreciate Fairfax County Public Library Systems for allowing us this opportunity to use our voices as we kind of dispel some of these stereotypes that we've all have about each other. And so we are going to go to Rabbi Jesse, who did talk so eloquently a little bit about the original sin in the Judaic faith. Could you expound a little bit about that, or if there's even a concept, or if you agree with Reverend Joy that it's a little bit of a misnomer?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Rabbi Joy that it's a misnomer. I mean, we talk about it in that there's a punishment for inaction, and we certainly see that many times in the Torah, right? If you don't follow God's command, then there will be some kind of punishment. But that being said, actually in Judaism, we don't at all believe in the idea of original sin. I didn't learn about original sin until I was in college, and somebody had mentioned it to me, because in Judaism, it's not talked about. It's not a concept that we have. We actually believe that every child is born as a tabula rasa, as a blank slate. And they make for themselves their place in the world. And so we really believe that it's up to each family to raise your child to be the good person that they are, that they should be, right? And we have the laws in Torah to help us with that and to guide us in that. So for us, there's sort of no need for salvation or saving, because me as an individual, I didn't sin. I didn't eat from the tree of knowledge, right? That was something that Eve did. And so for me, I make my own way in the world, and I make my own choices in the world. And I deal with the consequences, positive, negative, or otherwise, for all of my choices in the world. So, if you asked 10 Jews if they believed in original sin, you'd get 20 different opinions about original sin, I would guess. But generally speaking, we don't at all believe in original sin.
I definitely appreciate it, because like I said, I didn't know that, and I'm so glad that we're kind of dispelling some of those rumors ahead of time. But the one thing I did want to talk about, obviously, there is a theory too, and I'm not going to say whether I believe it or not, is that some of these religious doctrines are telling a metaphorical story to kind of tell us a little bit about who we are as a people, that these things didn't actually happen at the time and place that it happened. And there's a lot of scientific evidence, right, that there's a theory. It's called actually the mitochondrial Eve, which states essentially that biologically we all stem from some variation of the first mother. And she's also known as the African Eve. Like, we all come, our DNA, our history comes from places in Africa. And that's the scientific background of some of our DNA. So, I want to know how our faith, your individual faith traditions, kind of account for this racism or this otherness that people of color actually face, when the reality of the situation is, from a biological perspective, we are literally all people of color of some degree. So I want to talk a little bit about that with Nessa, as far as like, what do you feel is the Islamic faith? And the funny thing is, I actually interviewed somebody who said that and I thought it was fascinating, and I have to do more research on this, but there is a theory that there is a possibility that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was actually of a darker complected, more towards the African faith. So I don't know if you know anything more about that, or what is the thought about the African Eve theory in Islam?
Okay, so I think this goes back to when we're disconnected to the text of Quran and Islam, right? We have to look at it from what our faith says as Muslims, and then what Muslims actually do. They're not always going to be the same thing, unfortunately. Racism, looking at people's skin color, this has been going on for hundreds and thousands of years, in terms of people thinking they're better because their skin is lighter, and suppression. And then we see what has happened in the United States in the 401 years of the time when the enslaved were brought here, and what that meant. Just in recent times, here we see it. We see the systemic racism that is embedded in the foundation of this country, due to the fact that we see skin color as such an issue. But when we look at the faith itself, it's a completely different story. Now, regardless of whether our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, or Jesus, or anybody else, in terms of their skin color, we know that majority of the people in the Middle East are darker skin color. That's a known fact, right? And to deny it, you'd be dumb. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say it. They weren't white, okay? But in the Quran, in the traditions of Islam, God says, neither white is superior over black, and neither black is superior over white. An Arab is not over a non-Arab, and a non-Arab is not over an Arab, except in your piety and your good deed. God does not look at you as inferior based on the skin color that he gave you. That would be unfair, right? He is only going to judge you based on your deeds and your actions, how you treat people, how you worship God, and how you help humanity. If he created you one skin color and created somebody else another skin color, how would that be fair to now judge that person and condemn them for life, that you're going to be the worst kind of creation because, well, that's just what you were born into and you had no say? That would be an unfair God. That would be an unjust God. So in Islam, everything is literally spelled out very clearly. There is no race issue in Islam. And if someone who's Muslim is racist, they're going to be held accountable on the day of judgment in front of God, and they will have to answer, because that is not something anyone has a control over. Majority of the Prophet's companions and the people around him who have passed on traditions were dark skinned. They were women. They were from different backgrounds. They weren't, one monogam, white skinned people who were, holy, and then everybody else was kind of like, hoping they would just get in that club and be accepted. It doesn't work like that. Right. So it's really simple if we look at everything from the text perspective. Now, when we look at modern day Muslims around the world, we don't all follow that rule of God's commandment from the Quran. We do make judgment on people based on skin color. There are a lot of people from South Asia, my background, Arabs, who will not let their daughters marry someone who is of African descent because, oh, his skin color. But he's a great guy. He works, he's educated, he's hardworking, he's honest. But just because of his skin color, they will not let their daughter marry. That's racism. That goes against our faith, and that has to be called out. So it's pretty simple. I hope I answered your question in as simple way as possible.
No, you 100% did, and I definitely appreciate it, because it's not necessarily what you're trying to say. It's not the religion, but it's the people. And as people, we are fallible. We do make mistakes, and we're not perfect. So,
right. But I want to emphasize on the fact that the faith itself says that I've made everyone different so you can know one another. In the Quran,
exactly.
God says, I made you into nations and tribe so that you may know one another. Now, can you imagine if everybody looked the same, how boring we would be?
Oh my God, that would be like so boring.
Identity crisis, like who committed the crime? I don't know. 134 BC.
Yeah, exactly. It would be so boring.
It's a beauty. It's the beauty of humanness that we're so different, and we have to celebrate that.
No, I definitely appreciate that. So I'm going to ask you, Reverend Joy, the same question. How do you feel about that? And how do you feel about the Christian perspective on racism in general?
Oh, you're asking me my perspective on racism in general.
Oh, are we going to have another podcast for that?
Yes.
But we could just talk a little bit about how we all are.
Okay. Let me put it from this perspective. Yeah. You can take the text that we've been looking at today. Everybody can do this on their own. They can go to 2nd Genesis. They can go to, let me see, the 2nd chapter, verses 10 through 14. You can look at the boundaries that have been drawn for us of this place that creation was to have taken place. The reason that it is very clear, and I think as Ernesta has said, there's no question that everything came out of the Horn of Africa. And people were not referred to then as Black or white or yellow or whatever other color people want to attach to folks today. It was by tribe. It was, and the truth is that the majority of those tribes, I would gather, when you read the word of God for yourself, in all honesty, and the descriptions that are used, these, yes, they are people of color, period. And so to talk about Africa being considered the cradle of civilization, the birthplace from which all of everything came through, that is documented within our own text and through a lot of the other. I'm sure that Rabbi Jassy could speak more eloquently on as it pertains to the Hebrew Bible. I'll put it like that. But what has happened over the years, see, there's always the truth, and then there's other people's interpretation. And that's when we start to get in trouble. First, we try to interpret for someone else that is evident in what is written. And then when we begin to interpret it to make it look better, feel good for someone else, then that means other people get put out. And then people try to figure out how to make the darker tone people in scripture. And we've been through this in the story of Cush, and, you know, it's a bunch of garbage. And research over time has shared that. And it wasn't that long ago. It's only been a couple of years ago, if I recall, that one of our scholars came out and said, you know, we've got to tell the truth. We've got to tell the truth, because the truth is the only thing that is going to ever hold itself in all of our faith journeys. You know, there's no reason for any of us to feel that we have to be better than the next person, because God gave all of us everything that we needed from the beginning. The fact that we have to make stuff up, enhance it, colorize it, interpret it so that it meets my needs, and I get to be on top here and I get to keep my knee on your neck, is not going to work. And so, you know, I don't even want to get started, because I'm afraid if I get started, I won't stop. I've lived through so many race riots in Chicago. My family's been involved in riots way before I was even born, down in Columbia, Tennessee. Our family was very much involved in the Nashville riots, the Columbia riots, all because of the color of our skin.
Yeah.
Because someone felt it important that their color was more important than ours. And it made them feel better. And so a lot of people of color suffered.
Yeah,
But
I definitely appreciate that. And I know in some of the studies that I have, they literally try to say that at some point African Americans or Africans were of a different race. And I think that that's hilarious, since all of us came
all
from
of us
the same
come
place.
from the
So, like,
same
if you're gonna
place.
say that, it's definitely insane. So I definitely appreciate that. And I my son keeps calling me because he's wondering where I'm at. And thank you so much for that, because I can't even imagine, first of all, the fact that you're 70, you look gorgeous, but the fact that you've lived through all of that, and we can learn a lot from you. So thank you so much, Reverend Joy, for sharing that story. But I did want to talk to Rabbi Jesse. What do you guys feel about this? You guys, what does the Jewish faith say about color and color war?
So it's really interesting, of course, because as Reverend Joy mentioned, there is all this conversation about Moses's wife and where does she come from, and is she of a different color? And there is certainly conversation about that. I think you know, Judaism is no stranger to racism, unfortunately, both as perpetrators and as victims. We've sort of experienced both sides of that. Judaism, you know, is a religion that really was based more around tribes, and so there was a dislike of other tribes. It doesn't necessarily discuss the color of the tribe, or where they originated from. But there definitely is that sort of tribal issue. You know, I think what's really interesting is that in today's world, there is sort of a hierarchy of race, so to speak, in Judaism that nobody really likes to talk about. And it has to do really, again, with the lighter the skin, the higher you sort of are in some ways. And, you know, so we talk about things. There are Jews that originate from Eastern Europe. We're called Ashkenazi Jews. So my family is, on both sides of my family, originates from different parts of Eastern Europe, the former Soviet Union. There are Jews who originate from the Iberian Peninsula, from Spain and Portugal and North Africa. And then there are Jews who originate, and they're called Sephardi Jews. And then there are Jews who originate from the Middle East, and they're called Mizrahi Jews. And so we have these sort of three categories of Jews, and particularly, for us, and I am guilty of this, I know that I am, is that I think of things in what I call an Ashkenormative way, meaning that I think of them in the Ashkenazi way. But the reality is there are all sorts of traditions and customs that a lot of people in my congregation and other places observe that are not Ashkenazi traditions, and they're not Ashkenazi Jews, but we sort of just lump anybody who might generally look the same in that same category. And I've had a lot of conversations, particularly with Jews of color in this country, and the majority of them actually, because for many of them, they are not all, but many are converts into Judaism, whether they were or their parents or grandparents, somebody converted into Judaism. And so they're Ashkenazi Jews who are also Jews of color. And people look at them and assume that they are not solely based on the color of their skin. And so there's this tension within that is something that as a Jewish community, we are still reckoning with. And so that is, that is definitely a challenge for us. And of course, at the same time, we have a whole lot of other people who are telling us that we are a race. That started with Hitler and the Nazis, and right, like categorizing Judaism as a race, which we know, of course, is not. I mean, race in and of itself is a human creation anyways. It doesn't really, it's come to mean something, but we as humans created it to bring down other people, or to bring up other people, depending on who you were or where you were in that scale. And so I think Judaism, it recognizes that there is race, and that racism is a challenge. There are tribes. It said that Judaism, that we had 12 tribes from the 12 sons of Jacob. And it said that a couple of them sort of got lost along the way, we'll say. And there are Jews who were in Ethiopia and Uganda and India and China. And when you look at them, they look as if they are from Ethiopia and Uganda and China and India. And they are Jews, and they really had to fight for recognition of being Jewish, because the sort of powers that be, a different chief rabbi said, well, you were so disconnected for so long that we can't actually prove that you're Jewish. And yet we're sitting here saying, but they have the same customs and they say the same prayers. And yes, they were disconnected from this point on. Most of them have, like before or right around the time of the destruction of the temple, the second temple. And so, they don't celebrate Hanukkah, because Hanukkah is all about the destruction and rededication of the temple. So they didn't have holidays we had, because they had been so disconnected and isolated for so long. But they used sort of race as the construct for why not to accept them. And so, of course, there's this big push, to accept anybody who is in the Jewish community that way. So we're working on race and eradicating racism, and yeah.
I think when we know better, we do better. And the reality of the situation is, it is a social construct, right? Like it's something that we as a community put together. And like Reverend Joy was saying, to kind of put people down, put your knee on your neck. So I definitely appreciate that image, because that is exactly what we're doing. And we have one last question, and I'm going to ask everybody to kind of briefly touch base on that, so that we have a little bit of time for questions. But I read an article recently, and I want to read this quote because I thought it was very interesting, considering we're having this conversation. But the article stated, the three religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam readily fit in the definition of monotheism, which is to worship one God while denying the existence of other gods. But the relationship of the three religions is closer than that. They claim to worship the same exact God. So that's what people don't understand. It's like, it is the same God. So like when we just have different like Christian Arabs call God Allah because that is the name for God. And so a lot of people don't realize that it's just, we have the same God, it's just different names. But God as the Father does not lead the harmonious relationships among the members of the three religions. They have become squabbling children rather than a harmonious family. The one thing I want to say that I'm plugging Mommy Well Muslim, but we say specifically that the mother is the essence of the household. And as the mother in your faith tradition, what can we do as a community to bridge the gap between the squabbling children and bring about harmony amongst the three branches? So in like one word or less, what would you say in your faith tradition could bring about that harmony? And I will ask Rabbi Jesse that.
My computer froze, of course, in the middle of you asking that question. Can you repeat it real quick?
Essentially, as the mother of our faith traditions, and that's what we are. What are we teaching? What is the one word that you want to say that will bring harmony amongst the three branches?
I'm putting you on asking a rabbi to give you one word.
I know. I'm putting you on the spot right now.
You are.
Or a phrase.
I think I'm just going to say unity.
I love that. And thank you for the one word. Reverend Joy.
Love.
So multi-faith is my work, and that's what I'm in all the time. I mostly work with evangelical Christians and, people of the Jewish faith. I don't technically work with Muslims, even though I work at a mosque. It's funny, but I can say one word not to use is the word tolerate, because I stay clear of that word because it has such a negative connotation. It's like, I really don't like you, but fine, I'll put up with you. I don't want anybody putting up with me. You either take me as I am or just leave me alone. But the three words that I always talk about is understanding, respecting, and accepting, because these three words really embody what we all believe in terms of, acknowledging other people, loving who they are, bringing them to the table, working together to make this world a better place. There's so many issues that are plaguing this planet, whether it's climate, domestic violence, hunger, racism, so many things we need to spend our energy on instead of fighting each other and calling each other out that I'm better than you, or I don't believe in what you do and you have to convert. We need to stop that. That is not the way to go. So sorry, that was more than a phrase. And
no, but I definitely love that. And that's a good place to end on and open up. We have a few minutes. If anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
I think there were some questions in the chat also.
Oh, is there? Okay. So let's go. If you had to put, please, in the chat, I guess. Samara Weinstein, Renee said, yes, racism is social construct. Absolutely. Any conversation about women in faith brings up sexism and gender equality. It would be interesting to hear more about the role of women as clergy and leaders in the various faith tradition. That is a very good question. Obviously, we have three amazing leaders in their respective faith traditions. And I know I'm going to go ahead and give that question to Rabbi Jesse.
Yeah, so what's interesting is if you asked an Orthodox rabbi if I was a rabbi, he would tell you I wasn't. Which is to say that in progressive Judaism, we treat everybody equally, and we believe in egalitarianism, meaning that anybody of any gender can do anything. But Judaism, we have to remember, is a gendered religion, and that certainly comes into play in the commandments that we have and who is required to observe which commandments and when and where and all of that. And the Orthodox uses an idea called Kol Isha, the voice of the woman, as a reason why women can't lead, saying essentially that the voice of the women, the presence of the woman is distracting to the men, and they won't be able to fulfill their commandment of praying when they are supposed to. And so that's why in the Orthodox world, women have to sit separately from men, separated by a curtain or in a balcony or something like that, and are generally not allowed to lead services, although there have certainly been inroads, and there are modern Orthodox women who are becoming clergy or leaders in their communities. For us, the first female rabbi in the US was ordained in 1973. And so it hasn't really been that long, is the thing. And we're still every day fighting for equality and reminding people that just because I'm a woman doesn't mean that I can't do anything that a man can do. And I can lift the Torah just as well, and I can lead the prayers just as well. And I can help you fulfill those commandments just as well. And it's just that constant reminder and really the constant teaching that we can do this, and that gender, again, like race in many ways is a construct, gender norms are a construct that prevent us from seeing people in an equal way. And so there is certainly a lot of work yet left to do in the Jewish world, but I'm glad that I get to do it, and really that I stand on the shoulders of some giants, that I'm able to be here today, even doing what I'm doing.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And I know Reverend Joy mentioned a little bit about her childhood, how women were to be seen and not heard, and children. And it seems like that was some of the cultural things that you had to deal with as a child. But how do you feel like the roles are changing as we're getting moving on?
Oh, I think any opportunity and in any way people can creatively use to silence the voice of women, period. It is done. It is done in religion. It is done in the selection of clergy. It's okay for you to set yourself aside and study and do all the things that are required, but then it means nothing if others will not accept you to preach in their pulpit. That's not the experience in the disciples of Christ, but it is still very much a practice that a lot of my sisters in the Baptist tradition, in the Episcopal tradition, still face. So I think that the opportunity to have forums where women's voices are heard and they have an opportunity to express themselves and their experiences, I think it's an important forum to continue.
100%. And I'll also.
Oh, and I wasn't silenced as a child.
Good.
And I'm never silenced as an adult.
Oh, good. I'm very glad to hear that, because like I said before we started our panel discussion, we need to be the ones telling our story. And the funny thing is, part of the main reason why I really wanted this female panel was it's called Islam.com. I'm not bashing them, okay? But they have a whole section on Islam and women. Every single writer is a male. Mm-hmm. There is not one female writer. I'm like, you are literally talking about Muslim women in Islam, and you don't have a female writer on your staff. That's a problem. So I'm going to add, that's my segue to asking Hurnissa, like, how do you feel about the women's role in the Islamic perspective?
So Islam gives women just as much rights as men. Unfortunately, the patriarchy has usurp that and use it to its advantage to relegate women into a position of subservient cooking, cleaning women in the house, which is great, but that's not all we can do. We're very multi-talented and multifaceted in a lot of different ways. If we look at the Quran itself, out of the 114 chapters, one chapter is dedicated for Mary, mother of Jesus. She is the only woman who is by name mentioned in the Quran. And a lot of scholars actually view her as a prophet, because the majority of the time we say, oh, it's only men who are prophets. Gabriel came down and spoke to her, and she has all of these similarities that the other prophets had in terms of getting revelation, and her status as being the queen of heaven, right? If she was this, because she's a woman, bound to be sinful and evil, she would not have her own chapter. Like, she has presence in the Quran. Mary, mother of Jesus, has her own place in Islam. So I look at her as an example to follow, to be the one teaching. I'm not an imam, and that word I have a problem with also, because I do multi-faith work. A lot of times when I'm asked to speak on panel discussions, they're always like, oh, we need an imam because that's who we need. But when you say imam, you're completely leaving Muslim women out. An imam is someone who leads prayer, but Muslim women are scholars. They can give rulings on Islamic texts. They can tell you what Islam says. We have scholarships. We have women who are extremely learned, who can give you the rundown better than majority of the imams who lead prayers. So we have to start changing the linguistics and the words that we're using to describe women. I'll give you an example. Last year, I was asked to come and speak at the US Census multi-faith thing that they were having at the Washington Cathedral. I was one of 2 women, and the other one was a Catholic sister who was there, and we had a few men. And somebody asked the organizers, well, you have a Muslim female and you're going to have imams in the audience. Wouldn't the male imams get offended that the woman is sitting up there and she's not an imam and she's speaking? And one of the organizers happened to be Muslim, and she's like, no. Why would he get offended? Like, he should be happy there's a sister sitting up there and speaking. And she's like, she can speak better than the rest of them. So why would we not allow women to have that space? Again, we have to make space as women for each other and for ourselves. And that's one of the reasons why I do the work I do, is because the presence of women in all faith traditions is lacking. And we as women have to build each other up and change the mindset of men. Thank God I work with men who understand that. And at Adams Center, me being the voice and the face of the largest mosque in the country is profound. You won't find that anywhere else. And on top of that, I'm a single mother. I'm raising 4 kids by myself. I came here as a refugee. I have all these things that would usually be like, oh, no, we don't want her being the representative. But my faith gives me that pride. My faith gives me that presence, and we have to own it. There's nothing wrong with that, but we need to stick up for each other. And I think that is key.
That's so great. And I love your perspective. There was somebody in the chat box that said, I'm actually my friend Kelly. Hi, Kelly. Women are responsible for teaching and raising our children in our prospective religions, and we should be revered. I 100% believe that. As raising 3 men myself, I definitely feel like showing the respect for women, Eve as the original mother, I think that's something that is taught in the home for that next generation. So I'm extremely hopeful for this next generation. I am so thankful to you ladies. Reverend Joy had to pop off because she had another meeting, and we went a little bit over because this is such an amazing and very important conversation. Thank you, Rabbi Jesse. Hopefully I'll see you at the next meeting. Thank you, Haranisa. Thank you, Rabinder. I definitely appreciate everybody that came today. And I'm pretty sure this is going to be recorded and put online. I'm not quite sure, but feel free, if you feel like this was something that was of interest and you want to share it with other people, please do that. And thank you guys so much for joining us today. And we're 7 minutes over, but we tried our best. Thanks, Dad. Thanks, my mom. I have to say hi to them. That's my dad. My mom she's probably in her pajamas sleeping because it's close to her bedtime. So thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Zeba.
For another Faith and Friends.
Thank you,
Bye.
Zeba. Thank you, Rabbi Jesse, Haranisa.
Thank you so much, Rabinder.
Good night, everybody.
Good night,
We'll meet again. Thank you, everyone, for participating. We'll see you next time.
Until next time.
We do have another program on Behind the Veil on February 1st at 7 p.m. We'll talk about, it's a hijab day, and so there'll be discussion from both sides with personal perspectives. So if you can join us, please do. I did post the link in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everybody.